I'd like to welcome everyone here today to meet Dr Graham Pinn. Graham has a very interesting career. He's formerly a physician and has travelled extensensively and has been around the medical profession for just on
50 odd years.
50 odd years. Yeah. So Graham...
Don't look my age, I know. So
I've been married that long.
Graham has very generously offered to run a series of presentations. So this is the first in a 3 series. So they're going to build on each other as we go through. So it's going to be a really interesting set of presentations around natural health and well-being, but I'm not going to steal any of Graham's thunder. So I'd like to hand over to him and we will commence.
Let's go. Thanks,
let's
Chris.
go. Good
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, one and all. Curtsy. So this is my sort of stamp collecting from my medical days, and it looks like a lot of stuff, which it is. So my qualifications are as a physician, hospital physician in the UK and in Australia, a fellowship in tropical medicine from my travels. I did time as a GP and I did some children's paediatric stuff. So that covers a fairly extensive selection of activities. And this is just as a brief introduction, this is where I started off in London in the 1960s, Charing Cross Hospital. It's now, for some reason, been turned into headquarters of the Metropolitan Police, so they don't do any life-saving there. And back at the end here in this corner is where the medical school is that we lived in. All moved out of London nowadays and all much more sophisticated. So this was my first connection with the Sunshine Coast here, working at Nambour Hospital. And I was there for a fair few years until I got, I'm sure you can relate to this, got fed up with the bureaucracy of the whole show and decided it was time to start travelling again. I first came to Australia in Bundaberg in 1990, and at that stage it was the old school administration where you had a matron, superintendent and manager, and the 3 of them worked together to deal with any problems in the hospital. And then if you had a problem, the simple solution was there were no committee meetings. You used to go to the workshop at the back of the hospital on a Thursday evening with a 6-pack of beer, and everything was sorted out. That was simple bureaucracy, and now we've got more and more layers, so I left it all behind. So that's this sort of overview of my travels in various places in Europe, in the Middle East, Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Australia and New Zealand. So in these places, many of these countries, obviously the medical treatments are fairly limited, and so exposure to traditional medicines became part of my travels as well, and doing a lot of research into it.
So can I just ask you, in those places you just mentioned, were you actually working there as well?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. So I had about 20 odd years travelling in different countries before I finally settled down, and so that's just an example, and that's one of the places you may have visited. That's the Port Vila in Vanuatu, and I worked at the local hospital there for a couple of years. Again, interesting traditional medicines there, and you've perhaps heard of one of the most important traditional medicines there, which is kava, pepper methysticum, which is their substitute for alcohol. Have you ever tried it? It's not alcohol, but the difficulty is it looks like mud, it smells like mud, and it tastes like mud. So you've got to get it down here. Anyway, this was a series of talks I've just mentioned I've been doing for University of the Third Age on various aspects of herbal medicine, but we're just going to concentrate obviously on oncology there, so I'm really just going to do an introduction, the infectious diseases, the cancer therapy, and finish off with what really works, which is probably the most important thing of all, I think, in terms of your studies. So I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs here, but when we think of traditional medicines, there are a whole range of different sources of medicine, and I've just listed a few here, and we tend to forget that animals and insects can also provide medicines of different sorts. And as we've gradually evolved into modern medicine, we can look back on traditional medicines as well. And many countries in different parts of the world, particularly those that had written languages, could document things for next generations rather than mouth-to-mouth transmission. And with each evolution, the medicine got not necessarily more reliable, but different because of what was available. So, estimate maybe 25,000 medicinal plants throughout the world. So, obviously, that's a lot of plants that haven't really been explored, and a lot of plants that don't actually do anything either. Just as an aside here, this is quite important. I have to admit I'm a climate denier in terms of carbon dioxide and so on and so forth. And if I'd just like to show, I'd just like to show this because climate does make a difference to health. We are here now, and we're probably getting up to about here now in carbon dioxide levels. This is over 2,000–3,000 years, and this is taken from Greenland ice samples, and you can see the clearly demonstrated warming periods in the Roman and medieval warming period, and we're getting into one now. So this is nothing new in terms of climate change. And it does make a difference in terms of what happens, because when you've got a warmer climate, you get more food growing. There's less time devoted to actually collecting food, so there's more time to develop alternative activities with art and music and so on and so forth. And most importantly of all, fewer people die from the temperatures going up than die from the temperatures going down. So this was Roman Colosseum, built in the time of the Roman warring period, and we're still awaiting for sea levels to start rising to drown us all. This is one of the early authors of Western medicine, Hippocrates, a Greek gentleman who was one of the first doctors of the era to actually examine patients before suggesting what might be wrong with them, as opposed to just looking from the distance. He was the first individual who actually took your pulse, and that's still an important part of activity. As I noticed yesterday when I was at the golf club, and a lady took a turn and flopped on the deck in front of me, so not quite retired. And then this was another Greek doctor whose name lived on in medicine 500 years later, because he actually had the advantage of dealing with dead bodies. He was a doctor in Rome, despite his Greek origin, and he was able to dissect the bodies of the deceased gladiators. So he got a bit more of an idea about what was going on internally rather than just from the naked eye. And he developed this theory that there were 4 humours in the body: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm and blood. And it was an imbalance between these 4 humours which caused disease. This was totally wrong, of course, but this persisted in medicine for something like 1,500 years. And one of the important developments came from the Arab world. We're not getting too many important developments from the Arab world at the moment, but they were prior to the development of the establishment of Islam. Great research went on in the Arabic part of the world, and it overlapped with the Greek and Roman empires. So all these various gone the wrong way. All these various develops, you can see there: mathematics, hospitals, syringes, magnifying glasses, ligatures for bleeding and so on. They were all part of that culture of over 1,000 years ago. And they also invented a whole lot of other interesting mechanical things. So at this stage, the Arab civilization was certainly the place to be, and Europe was in the Dark Ages, in the medieval period, and this was where everything was going on. So early medicine, as it still is in some countries in the world, is often associated with ritual and clothing and a bit of high priest sort of involvement. And now also hallucinogenic substances, those naughty things, were also brought into the picture to improve the belief in the outcomes. So all these sort of different medicines sort of coalesced into Europe, and the modern medicine slowly developed from that origin. But lots of folklore things persisted. You can see I've given you some example here of folk medicine cures of yesteryear. And there was malaria in Europe at this time of life in the medieval times, and it was cured by hanging a spider in a nutshell around your neck. So just bear that in mind if you get struck by malaria. And all sorts of other weird and wonderful things were used. Some of them which still persist in the some aspects of lighting with colour therapy and so on and so forth. But from the Western perspective, the establishment of the monasteries provided the focal point for medicine to start developing, and because they were a source of writing, documentation, and they went on for hundreds and hundreds of years, they actually were able to describe, document plants and their medicinal properties. And this is why a lot of medicinal plants, which we now use, some in orthodox, some in alternative medicine, had this name officinal attached to it, and that just means the officinal was the room in the monastery where they mixed their herbs together to produce medicine. So a lot of plants have Latin names which have officina, officinalis, officinale, because they've been used since medieval times. So we've got a whole lot of different therapies which are now recommended, and I've just listed a few here. The list is sort of endless, really. Some of them are more in the eye of the beholder than in actual therapy. Aromatherapy certainly still has some proven benefit, particularly in psychological problems, but there are a number of other conditions, a number of other treatments which really do not seem to have stood the test of time. For example, the use of leeches to suck out poisons. It's not acceptable too widely, but as I've written there, in France in the 1800s, this was a traditional treatment with style, and millions of leeches were used. Enemas are now back in business again. There are all sorts of colonic lavage places that we can talk a little bit more at another time. And acupuncture, and I've just having had a bad back, I've had a series of acupuncture injections myself. So this is moxibustion. It's a strange concept, really, and my understanding is there's no proof of any benefit. It's still used in a lot of countries, but with no, it obviously looks like it's doing some good, but there's no evidence that it does. Similarly with cupping, I don't know whether any of you guys do this sort of stuff, but again, the concept is of sucking out poisons, and there's no evidence of benefit of it with that therapy. Acupuncture, as I said, does have some evidence of benefits in painful conditions, and there's quite a sophisticated philosophy of where the acupuncture lines are to treat whatever condition it might be. So there's a bit of evidence for that. Another common theory, apart from putting on leeches to suck out blood, was to actually bleed people. And this was a common therapy, even as recently as that date there, the early 1800s. So you bleed somebody to remove the poisons. Unfortunately, sometimes if you bleed them too much, then they die, and that's what happened to George Washington when he was over-aggressively treated, and that's just an example of a bleeding bowl to collect them in. So homeopathy, this is actually a relatively recent development in traditional medicine terms, developed in the late 1800s, and the theory is that a small amount of something which, a substance which causes a disease can be treated by a minute amount of the same substance. It seems illogical. There's no actual proof that it works, but it's still quite widely practiced. Even King Charles, great supporter of homeopathy. So how do you decide what to treat? Well, Chris and I were talking just before there. One of the realities is, of course, that a lot of common conditions, and I've listed a few there, coughs and colds and so on, are transient. They will get better by themselves anyhow. So if you associate getting better with taking a particular plant, then that can erroneously be thought to be the cure of the condition. So traditional medicines going back over many hundreds of years can still sometimes not cure what they're supposed to do. A whole range of conditions there, which some of them which have a psychological component to them as well, which makes it even more important that you have a little bit of showmanship with it as well. This was probably about the first European documentation of herbal therapy going back to the 1600s. Thomas Culpeper wrote this sizable tome on the effects of treatment, and you can still get a copy of this book. It's a fascinating reading, and there are all sorts of treatments which he recommended which have come and gone, but some of them still stick to this day, and we can discuss that another time. But obviously every part of the world that you like to think of has their own traditional medicine, and now they're being increasingly documented. Japanese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine from India, Chinese medicine, and I just listed there maybe as many as 500 different plants that are used in Chinese medicine. So it's all over the world. Even in Australia, there's been documentation of Aboriginal medicines as well. Although, as you can see from the list over here, the conditions that they're being treated are fairly superficial treatment. Obviously, there was no known diagnosis of heart disease or cancer or all sorts of other more complicated conditions. So it's basically superficial conditions with a different number of plant medicines being used. North America as well, similar sort of, it's actually quite surprising how sometimes you do see similar plants in one continent being used to treat the same condition as plants in another continent. So that adds a little bit to the sort of science behind the whole thing. But a lot of medicine in traditional areas is with showmanship, and the shaman with his drums and hallucinogenic substances was now gone, obviously. South America has its own traditional medicines, and I can give you an interesting example. The Amazonian rainforest, which they've just had not so long ago at the last conference of parties meeting, has vast numbers of plants, trees and plants. Most of them have not been explored in terms of medicinal properties, but they are gradually working their way through the availables to look for new treatments for arthritis, for cancer, for diabetes are being discovered from natural sources. And also for cancer, there are a range of plants which have been suggested might be usable, but none of them, to my knowledge, of this group has been shown to be effective. So if you've got 80,000 different plants to pick from, it takes you a while to get through them all, as you can imagine. This is still available. This is the updated version of herbal medicine produced by the European Union, and it's called the e-monographs, and they look at the evidence basis for plants and whether they do actually have any runs on the board in terms of efficacy. This is also a very good book, written by me about 20 odd years ago for doctors, just again trying to show what medicines, natural medicines.
Copies in the library, absolutely.
and at all levels, that you can get too complicated or you can get simple traditional remedies like this sort of book. What I get concerned about is this sort of stuff with with the magazines that promote wellness with new wonder cures. And not only is it problematic in terms of the plants may not be doing anything, but they may actually be causing harm, and they may actually be diverting a patient from taking a treatment which is effective. So there are all sorts of things going wrong there. So going back to where we started from, lots of countries don't have developed medical systems. So China, for example, about 40% of medical care is traditional. South America, similar sort of numbers. India, similar sort of numbers. So worldwide, the traditional treatments are still very important because a big chunk of the world's population still uses them. And fortunately, I make this little point down at the bottom, it's not a competition between orthodox and alternative medicine, and increasingly nowadays, particularly for patients who prefer that sort of approach, it is being introduced into orthodox medicine as well. And these some examples here in Canada, a large number of general practitioners using these sort of approaches, and in Holland. So there is still this overlap between the two sides of medicine, and it shouldn't be a competition. However, it is big business nowadays, that's for sure. And this I got from a news service. So global medicine market in 2021 was estimated at about 150 billion US dollars, going up fast, and estimated to reach about 350 billion dollars by 2030. So a lot of money is being spent, and a lot of money is being wasted as well. So we need to get some science into the concept rather than following the latest magazines. In Australia, as an example, vitamin consumption is widespread and with very little evidence of benefit, and supplements of a whole whole different variety are now widespread in any supermarket. The question is, what do they actually achieve? And the answer is, for most things, very little. And the other thing which tends to get lost in all this is that the big pharmaceutical companies are the ones who are running these alternative medicine companies in general. So they've got a foot in both pies to make a buck out of it. So as you can see here, growing significantly at speed. I come from an area in London in the 1960s where, although it's still a fair bit of time from the end of the Second World War, there was still malnutrition, there was still old-fashioned diseases like scurvy and rickets, and obviously if your diet is deficient, then these sort of medications are seriously required. But otherwise, that's just an example of a child with rickets. You can see the bones all bowed out there because they've been not calcified properly. Vitamin D deficiency, obviously much less common here because you had a lot more sunshine. So this is just one example I picked at random, and I don't know if any of you are taking this, but this is a common sort of approach with multiple vitamins, amino acids, multiple minerals, and it costs you a fair bit of money, and yet does it actually achieve anything? That's the question. And the answer is only if you are vitamin or nutritionally deficient in the first place. So running through it all, there's no evidence that extra vitamins, if you have an ample amount in your diet, there's no evidence that extra vitamins will enhance your health, will improve your longevity, will reduce your risk of disease or cancer. And there is some evidence that excessive use of some vitamins can actually be harmful as well. So that's something to bear in mind. The one important one, which is, I think, used generally throughout pregnancy, is folic acid, which is a sort of vitamin that is important for the developing baby. And if you don't get enough of that, then you do have problems for the child. So again, this is all big money nowadays. Mineral supplements going up and up and up as well. Globally, 13 billion a few years back, heading towards 21 billion. So that's a lot of money being spent, and what is it actually achieving? Obviously, if you are deficient in these minerals for whatever reason, and a lot of women will be iron deficient because of menstrual flow, and if you have osteoporosis, then calcium in combination with vitamin D is indicated. Vitamin B can help with skin disorders. Magnesium is now the wonder cure for everything, and it actually does have some significant benefits as well. I used to use magnesium infusions because if you've got somebody who's got an irregular heartbeat which won't settle down, if you've got somebody who's got an intractable attack of asthma which won't settle down, if you've got somebody who's got a condition called eclampsia with high blood pressure in pregnancy, magnesium is the business. And it's almost impossible to poison yourself with magnesium because it goes out easily through the kidneys. So that's another example of what they're supposed to do, these supplements. And this word supports, or rather than is scientifically confirmed, they use weasel words like support, so it supports energy, immunity, muscle function, healthy skin. Clinically proven, what does that mean? Nobody knows. These are the sort of words that they use, and the use of testimonials from important people, that's been going on. That sort of approach has been going on ever since time immemorial. So going back to before the establishment of proper orthodox medicine, the quacks used to go around to the shows and supply all sorts of nostrums which were supposed to cure the snake oil syndrome. So from the orthodox perspective, this was just really the start of how orthodox medicine developed. Starting, I mentioned Galen at the start there, and then we went on in the time of Henry VIII in the UK to establish a training system for doctors. And at that stage, you probably know that the surgeons traditionally are called Mr. rather than Doctor, and this is because historically the surgeons were actually barbers. They were the only ones who had the knives to actually do the surgery with. So they weren't proper doctors, and some people would say they're still not proper doctors, but that's another story. Sorry?
Sorry.
Yeah. So then apothecaries training became formalised, and gradually going through the stages, the first proper training routine for doctors in the UK was in the 1850s, and nursing training around that sort of time as well. And being old traditionalists, when I started in medicine, they were still using Greek measures of not ounces or mils. It was still drams and minims, old-fashioned Greek measures. So they're pretty slow to change in a lot of ways. And this is just a photograph of one of the early pharmacies, and the names of these people who opened this store became part of the pharmacological hierarchy, if you like. So in the early 1800s this was going on, and these companies have gradually joined to amalgamated together, and they're now the big pharma thing, which perhaps has too much power. So when did it all change? Well, it changed with the Industrial Revolution and more carbon dioxide, but it changed because of the introduction of electricity and the introduction of power, which meant that you could look at the plants that you were using as treatments, and you could separate them, and you could find out what active ingredients there might be from these plants. And so as this happened, the medicine slowly moved away from plants themselves, because once you'd found the particular chemical from the plant which resolved the problem, you could actually have a go at making it yourself without the plant. And that's how it progressively separated. So in terms of, just as an example here, I just listed a few medicines, and probably something like 50% of modern medicines come from plants. So aspirin is the old favourite, and I'll just tell you that little story about the top two there, because it's an interesting anecdote of circumstances. So when the Spanish invaded South America, malaria was rife. They had no idea what malaria was. They knew about fever, but they knew nothing about what was causing it. and they knew that the bark of this particular tree seemed to be effective in controlling the fever. And the tree was the cinchona tree, and it was subsequently found in more recent times to produce this chemical quinine, which is now a regular treatment for malaria. But they didn't know what it was, so the very financially savvy Jesuit priests, they bought supplies of the cinchona bark back to Europe, and at that time there was malaria in Europe, so it did actually have some beneficial effect in dealing with some fevers which were caused by malaria. Then an interesting English GP thought this bark is just too expensive, so I'll try the bark of another tree. So apart from making cricket bats out of it, he used the bark from the willow tree, and that's where aspirin was developed from as well. So these are sort of examples of overlaps, and obviously all our antibiotics were originally derived from fungi, and we are now, because of increasing antibiotic resistance, we're getting to a difficult stage, but it's about to be overcome because the lab guys have developed a new method of growing fungi. Historically, they were all grown in the air, but there's a vast number of fungi in the ground that grow without oxygen, what's called anaerobic, and they're now working out a system of growing these fungi with the hope that maybe they'll find new antibiotics. Cancer drugs, I'll talk a bit about that in the next lecture, but quite a number of the orthodox cancer drugs do come from plants. For those of you who have cholesterol problem, statins, simvastatin and the like, again, are originally derived from fungi. Many heart drugs, the old-fashioned, probably the most useful used medication historically was the medicine called Digoxin, which comes from a plant as well, and so another overlap. Many other drugs for blood pressure and so on have come from plants, and the most effective treatment for diabetes is also plant-based, a drug called Metformin. So there's plenty of overlap going on there, and I just make the point at the bottom there, when an alternative medicine is proven effective, it becomes an orthodox medicine and is adopted, and this is happening all the time. So what are the problems with just sticking with traditional medicines? Well, firstly, there have been many examples of a particular plant having some benefit for a certain condition, but sometimes it looks a bit like another plant, and the other plant is actually not good for you. So the problem number one is identifying the correct plant. Then you've got to collect it, and excessive collection in some parts of the world has driven many plants to extinction. Because it's a natural substance, the collecting of it can be contaminated. Then how do you stop it going off? How do you preserve it? And then if you can find the active ingredients, and if you can, then you can standardize it. But if you know that one leaf contains so much of a chemical in the morning, it won't have the same amount in the evening, never mind summer and winter. So standardization is a big problem. And then, of course, long time usage as well. So, from my point of view, from my point of view, this is where the problem occurs. Clinical trials are very expensive to run, and if you want to do them properly, you have a large enough number of people. You have to have what's called a double-blind trial, so neither the patient nor the doctor knows what you're taking, and then you have to have clearly defined outcomes. So it's a big problem with many plant medicines because it's a naturally occurring substance. It's obviously often difficult to trademark and have your own use for it. So can you justify the big cost of clinical trials when even if you prove something is effective, somebody else can just copy it? So big problems. And nowadays we do have the Trade and Goods Administration, which authorises all these new additions to the market, because many traditional medicines in the market are also potentially hazardous. And this is the points to bear in mind. Not only may, as I mentioned, some plants not have any effect, but they might have the effect that you didn't particularly want. And if we go back to William Shakespeare, he was a great one for the poisonous effects of plants. This is the three witches round the cooking pot when we three meet again, and they were digging up hemlock, which is one of the traditional Shakespearean remedies to knock off the bad guys in the plays, and that's just a picture of Conium maculatum, which is its Latin name, and was used in a number of other works as well. This is another interesting one, deadly nightshade. Obviously its name suggests that it's not particularly good for you to take, and it's the berries that have always been the problem, and children eating these berries. It contains actually a naturally occurring substance, something called atropine, which is good for you in some situations and bad for you in other situations. But it can be good for heart problems. But the original name, Atropa belladonna, was because they used to use the juice of the berries, put it into a little liquid, and then drop it into the eyes. And it made the pupils big, which made the ladies more attractive. So, belladonna, beautiful lady. So that's how that one came along. And it's now used, still used commonly, not the plant, but the atropine which comes from it, still used commonly in medicine. And of course there are other intentional or otherwise uses of natural substances. We won't dwell on that one too much. Has there been an appeal yet? I think there was one.
What is it?
The mushrooms, magic mushrooms, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So this is how the situation is evolving now. As traditional medicines become more and more mainstream, it becomes more and more important that you actually document effectiveness, and you document any side effects, and you also document interactions, because if, like many people, particularly of advanced age like me, you end up being on a multitude of pills, you can have interactions with the pills, similarly with your naturally occurring medicines. And if you're interested in this sort of stuff, then you can look up the Cochrane Library. This has been going for 30 odd years, and they've got a collection of clinical trials, orthodox and alternative, and it can give you some sort of sense of the science behind it and the statistics. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of good stuff on the online, as well as some very shaky stuff. So this is just, I think, probably about enough for this introduction. This is the Physic Garden in Chelsea. You notice the spelling, that's how it used to be spelt. If you're in London, I strongly recommend you go there. It's a 5-acre walled garden in the heart of Chelsea. If you don't know that it's there, you wouldn't know to look for it. But this is one of the most important areas of research into traditional medicines in the UK. And they have all sorts of strange plants from all over the place growing as well. Well worth a visit. And there's also an Australian connection here. If you can see here, these big clamshells, they were actually collected by Joseph Banks on his trips to Australia when he was with Captain Cook. So there's an Australian connection there as well. I think that's probably enough. Thank you.
Fascinating.
So it's just an introduction. I think the next one, which probably more interests you, is going to be on June the 10th, which will be on specifically on cancer treatment. And I think that's probably
wonderful. No, thank you very much, Graham. And I'd like people to put their hands together for Graham. Thank him very much. And also our online audience. Don't forget Graham's next presentation's on June the 10th, and then also the final one is on August the 12th. So
yeah.
that will be also very interesting, and you can really see the wealth of knowledge and understanding that Graham has around the topic. I love the history of medicine, having been in the industry myself, and where it all comes from is really important to where we're actually going. So I think that in itself is a strong benefit as well. So again, thank you very much, Graham.
Pleasure.